Hey Bio, welcome to your last video of biology. So that probably feels pretty good. We have like a couple more weeks of the school year left. I'm ready to be done. I hope you are too. But I've had a really good time learning with you guys. I really hope that with this last pieces of information, you take all the information you've learned this year and you're able to apply it in just to your everyday world. Because again, biology is the study of life. So everything around us, everything we do is in association with biology. So in this video, we're going to talk about human population growth. And we've already watched a video in class about this, like what is the true issue related to human population. And now what we're going to do is just put some statistical data to the human population growth and what we can do in our small community to help the global society. After this video, you should be able to describe early human population growth, outline the stages of demographic transition, explain trends in recent human population growth, and summarize the human population problem and possible solutions to the problem. So back in the day, like I'm talking a really long time ago kind of thing, there was really slow human population growth. And I really hope you understand this. So a couple of things you want to keep in mind. Human population growth didn't really truly start booming until we started living in more tight-knit communities. So there was a time in history where humans didn't actually live super close together. They lived in their families, and there was typically a mother and a father, and they had their offspring. But you didn't see these whole villages come up until about a couple thousand years ago. And so there's a few reasons for this. And one of those reasons is because of the high birth and death rate. At the beginning of our population, what you saw was children didn't make it past the ages of infancy. So really they're born and then they didn't make it due to diseases, due to predation, anything like that. Same with adults. They hardly ever made it up to a certain age, and typically around the age of 30 was considered old and dying. So even that, what we consider now in our population, a little bit of a young age, that 30 time frame, back in early population growth time frame, this was really not a good thing because they were considered old. So again, in those early time frames, we saw a lot of birth and death rates. So really high birth and death rates. So those equal out, causing a really slow population growth. It wasn't until about the time frame of the invention of agriculture. And this is approximately maybe 6,000 years ago. And so when we have this agriculture, there are a few consequences to that. One of the things being availability of food. So if a family can't produce food for themselves, they're going to starve. That's just basic math. However, now with agriculture, we have people farming the food. We don't have to do the work, and we can still have this food available to us if we're willing to pay for it. So that was a huge increase or a huge contribution to the increase in the human population. Now, once food becomes available, there are a lot of things that start opening up. Another thing that's associated with the invention of agriculture is the establishment of villages and cities. So now people flock to one area to get food. So if food is all located in one central place, everybody's going to surround themselves around the resource. And remember, everything is about resources because that's what we need to survive. Food is a basic need. Water is a basic need. So what do you think these villages and cities are going to surround themselves by? Their basic needs. So now, I want you to understand that this is a good thing, right? Humans are a social organism. They need to be around others. So when we get close-knit, we start collaborating and working together. However, there are also consequences to this. So for the first villages and the first cities were established, there were some issues that was written into that. One of the biggest things was poor hygiene. What do you do with your poop? And they didn't know what to do with it. So guess what happened? A lot of diseases in water. So this is where a lot of people were still not able to live to a long, ripe age because they were dying of these diseases associated with poor hygiene, overcrowding. Any kind of sickness was easily spread because everybody lived so close to one another. And I want you to keep in mind that people aren't living in houses like we're living in now. People are living in like like little huts kind of thing. And I'm not saying that's a bad thing, because we do still see that in today's global society. But I'm saying back when we were trying to establish cities here in the United States or here in early Europe, you're seeing that this overcrowding and leads to diseases. So we had to figure out a way to get rid of these diseases and cause this crowding to not be so much of an issue. Now, obviously, we know our history of humans, and we know that science and medicine and everything else is invented. So as we increase in our intellectual abilities and information, we're able to solve these problems like diseases and overcrowding and all of the diseases associated with domestication of animals. So once that happens, our birth rate is allowed to increase. But bear in mind, early population growth was really, really slow. And this happens with every population. It's always a little bit slow. And then eventually there becomes this sweet spot where we really, really start to really expand and really grow at an exponential rate. So when was that historical time frame where we actually went from this slow population growth to this really, really bustling population growth? This was about, and this is called a demographic transition. And what this means, it's a historical shift from these really high birth and death rates to these low birth and death rates. And so basically, when we're widening this huge gap between the birth and the death rate, and we allow kids and infants to grow up to be adults who can produce children, we are now able to contribute to a really, really healthy society. So it's a kind of little bit opposite of what you guys have been thinking in class. You guys have really said we need a lot of births. Well, who's going to take care of all of those children? So there's this huge, this term known as demographic transition, where again, it's the shift from high birth and death rates to low birth and death rates. And again, that makes that really, really big middle area in the age sex structure. And I'm going to show you what these look like in class. So don't worry if you're like, you can't visualize this. But I do want you to keep in mind, this shift occurs due to advancement in technology, medicine, and education. So it's not something that happens overnight. It takes a complete time, or it takes a lot of time. Some things that really helped the death rate fall were things like I already said, advancement in science and technology. How do we get rid of these diseases? How do we control hygiene? How do we make farming as efficient as possible? And if you are a farmer, you know that there has been so much work into making farming just as efficient and as not easy, I shouldn't say easy, but like as best as we can do it so that we get the maximum gain from the land. And this is an artwork. Like this is not something you can easily do. This is learned behavior passed on from generation to generation. So a huge appreciation for that. But that's one of the huge factors that help bring that death rate really down. The other thing, like I had mentioned, there's a gap. And when there's a gap between the birth and the death rate and that widens, populations really, really start to grow. So again, when your birth rate outnumbers your death rate, you're going to see some changes, right? So the birth rates fall. And this is another contributing factor to the demographic transition. When large families no longer feel like children are a benefit. And that sounds awful to say, but when there was a time in our population that families relied heavily on the hands of children. And I'm not saying this in a negative way. What I'm saying is that families had a lot of kids so that they could survive on their farm. And this is a good thing. You see the population has grown a bit, but eventually it becomes where we have machinery that can do work 5 times as fast as 5 kids. So it's like, do we really, really, truly need that many kids if we can handle all this work? The other thing that happened several thousands of years ago was people were required to send their kids to school. So now instead of working, these kids have to go to school by law. And that doesn't sit well with some people because now the kids are a financial burden. They can't contribute to their family. They can't work for the family. So they're really just they're just eating parents out of house and home. So it became a time where parents are like, we don't really need that many kids. We can have two and be fine. So this is where that birth rate and death rate start to become equal, and we see zero growth. So again, this is why our population didn't boom right away. And I showed you a graph from 1650 to 1850. It took 200 years for us to double our population. So why that birth and that death rate really are equating one another pretty closely. And so it's not until the Industrial Revolution where we start to boom again. And then eventually people are like, well, maybe I don't need that many kids. And again, we see this little equaling out. So it's not like we're increasing in billions every 2 days. Now, a couple of things you need to understand is that demographic transition happens in stages, and we see this every single day in our own global society where different populations are in different stages of demographic transition. The more common trend is that more developed nations are in further stages than underdeveloped. All right, here's a snapshot of the 4 stages. I'm not going to talk about them in a huge amount of detail. I will give you examples in class. But stage 1, where we have a high birth and death rate. Stage 2, low death rate, high birth rate. So that's where we boom in population. Stage 3, where we have a high death rate. Really, that birth rate kind of stays the same a little bit, but not super equal to to the death rate. And then stage 4, where we have low birth and death rate. Again, you're going to see more developed nations in the stage 3 and 4 area versus the stage 1 and 2. Underdeveloped are going to be more in the stage 1 and 2 area. And the very last thing I want to talk about is recent population growth. So I just talked about the early population growth, what actually caused our population to grow the way it did. But now let's go ahead and take our shift and talk about the recent growth we've seen and future population growth. So in recent population growth, a couple of things to keep in mind, that is tracked by populations using age sex structures. So how healthy and developed a nation is really can be pictured super well on an age sex structure, so a population pyramid. Each population has issues associated with it, and that's why, and we're not here to talk about social issues, but social issues really do contribute to the health of a population. If you have a population that is super worried about how they're going to get water, you're not going to see a lot of people survive into adulthood to contribute to their social economy. So it really does, this age sex structure really does tell us what stage a population is in. It really does tell us the health of that population. In future population growth, we've already talked about this. That we talked about in that video. It kind of mentioned, you shouldn't feel super frustrated with the number of population. What we should be a little more frustrated with is the unequal distribution of resources and wealth. And I'm not saying this to insult anybody. What I'm saying is when people who are in developed nations are only having 2 kids, but are contributing the most to taking all the resources, that's a problem. That means that others have to rely on children to help them work. They have to rely on other ways of getting resources. So really, that's what we should be thinking about for our population growth. The reason why our population is booming in certain areas of underdeveloped nations is because there is no other way to access energy. There is no other way to access food or water without having more kids to help you. So those are some things I want you to consider. We are going to do a little bit of a project on thinking of solutions that we could contribute to helping end this global crisis, and not just the population growth, but really ending the fight for resources. Like, what could we do? That's all I have for this video. It took a little bit longer than I expected, but if you have any questions, make sure to ask me on Edpuzzle. Congratulations on watching your very last video of bio.